Dave, I wanted to start off by asking you if you can take me on a little journey, just an overview of recent changes at Audio Research as a company went from the Macintosh Group, then to Trent Suggs, and now with the Cora Acoustics with Valerio Cora. What has changed, and how does the current owner fit into the culture of the company?
It's been an interesting transition because I was at Audio Research when Bill first sold the company to Quadrivio Fine Sounds, and then they bought companies. They owned Sonus Faber, they bought Macintosh, they bought Wadia, some other companies. And it was a really good transition. They invested in the company, and it really helped us grow. That was in 2008. And then in 2000, and we grew organically, which was really wonderful. So we had new products, our distribution increased a little bit, but the key was we really were in a sweet spot for new products. The company grew again in 2014. They were purchased by a different group, which was LPO. And then the reality is when you're part of a private equity group, they really want to grow all the companies and then sell them to another group. Look, we're a vacuum tube manufacturer. When we were purchased, especially after Macintosh joined the group, they encouraged us to do things like wave soldering for our boards and processes like that to make us more efficient. What we found, unfortunately, was that the way we were doing things was the best sounding. So we continued to solder everything by hand to make things really from the ground up. That's good, but you can't get the amount of growth that they really were looking for. So eventually, they decided to sell us, and that was really the best thing for us. Our CEO was CEO for the whole group, and we just didn't get enough time. With him in town, so they sold us to Trent Suggs. Trent was our old sales manager. Trent was tremendous. He was a great sales manager. I was VP of sales, so we worked together very closely. And it was his dream to buy the company. Well, he did, and he did a lot of things right in 2020, which was just, during COVID. And he brought a lot of processes in-house. And, we started, like the Ghost Meter and our amplifiers, we started to build them in-house from the ground up. We bought a laser machine. We're laser etching. We're getting the acrylic locally, processes like that, which was very good. The reality was that it's really a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult than you think. And what we needed was a lot more engineering. And it was difficult to do both. And Trent there was a time when some of the banks in like Silicon Valley just went belly up essentially. And then they called in his loan in 2023, and that was difficult. He could not meet that, and so it was really with a lot of sadness that he lost control of the company. Fortunately, they realized they did not just liquidate us. There was a true value there, and that was very important. So they put us up for auction. We continued running. We were still in full production. Service was running. We were still answering calls. Our internet was up. Everything was going normally, so it was kind of invisible. But they took bids, and Valerio Cora bought the company. He had the highest bid. And it was interesting because I met Val in 2 or 3 years before at Rocky Mountain Audio Fest, where he was showing his Cora speakers, and he was showing with Ref 750 SEs and a Ref 10 and Ref Phono, and I loved it. I walked around the corner and met him, and he owned all this equipment. He's just a crazy fan of Audio Research, and I appreciate the fact that he wasn't asking to borrow equipment for the show. He owned it all, and he owned other products really going back. So this was the right person. He understood who we were, what we were doing, and he wanted to continue the legacy, and that was the most important thing. So he bought the company in 2023, and since then, we had employees come back to work for us. And he's hired 6 new engineers, and in different fields. And it's a great team. Our chief tube engineer, or chief engineer now, is really knows tubes backwards and forwards. He's created LP mastering, all tube LP mastering. He was actually working for a company that worked for the government. And what most people don't realize is that tubes still go into satellites because
Yes.
they're immune to pulses and so electromagnetic pulses. So he knows tubes, and he's the best thing of all is really he's young. I mean, I don't know how old Dylan is. He's probably 40. Which means he has a lot of years ahead of him. And he brought a lot of new thinking to the team. And we have a programmer, we have a person who just specializes in layout, and we were really able to fill out the team. And that's what we were missing before. Because
seems like you filled that gap, yeah.
We did. Well, with the 330, the 330 was debuted originally as a 320 in 2022. And it was just was meant to be a large version of a 160M. But Val took it to the next level. He's like, no, we're not going to settle for just making it larger. We're going to make it the best amplifier we possibly can. And engineers love to hear that. So that was a really good thing. And he understood, he got the full picture. And that was very, very important for us.
So in light of that history, obviously you've been with audio research since the late 80s, I believe, very early 90s.
Yeah, Bill hired me in 89. So, and I took a detour. I actually went to Teal Loudspeakers, worked with Jim and Kathy for 4 years, and actually came back in 96. So, And, but it was great because I was, Bill was I was like the prodigal son coming home. I love the company.
Well, in light of that sort of experience that you've had with the company, what would you say is an iconic audio research product? What encapsulates what audio research is about?
Probably, it's hard. We went through this look when we did our 50th anniversary book, and probably the amplifier would be the D150. Which was the first really big, powerful tube amplifier. And it came out at a time when speakers were really inefficient. They needed lots of power. There were lots of like Infinity IRSs and things like that in the market. And it just dominated. And the SP3 was out at the same time. And that was a seminal product for the company. It really made audio research. But probably the equivalent preamp to the D150 is probably the SP10. And that was all-tube preamp, high gain. I was actually in retail when it came out, and I thought, wow, will anyone spend this much money on a preamp? And it was, about just under $4,000 at the time. But that was, 40 years ago. So, and it just developed, and then the SP11, things like that followed. But that was quite a revolutionary product. And there are other people, another magazine editors who still own theirs, from 35, 40 years ago. So a great product, and it's really sought after on the used market.
Sure. Okay, so that's the iconic type product from audio research. In terms of your own personal preferences, what would you consider your favorite audio research product?
Probably, it's hard to say. It really is.
It could be sound quality. It could be personal reasons. There could be some attachment because you've owned it or because of other reasons.
Yeah, I think probably the SP. Not the recipe, but the reference 3 line stage, and I love the Ref 1. I love the Ref 2. The Ref 3 was just another step, and it was someone said it's so organic sounding, and then maybe that was what it was. Everything gets better, and the newer preamps are better, but that one was a really special release, and I'm not sure for amplifiers. Probably the 610T, because the reference 600 was such a great amplifier, but the 610T had all this power and dynamics and resolution, but it had such great finesse. A friend of ours, actually Mike Lathis from HRS, is a good friend, and I remember he got a pair and he was shocked because of the finesse of that amplifier. It could sound like a really small, low-power amplifier. It just sorted everything out so well and layered things so well. So I just love that amplifier.
Right. So do you think there was a time where audio research had an idea that the sound and the performance of valve amplification and solid-state amplification, and even Class D amplification, was kind of converging to a point where the performance was very, very close in terms of sound quality? Because obviously there were experimentation, or there were products from audio research that were purely solid-state.
Right. Well, if you take the SP11, for example, you went from the SP10, which was an all-tube high-gain preamp, to chassis, separate power supply, separate analog or gain stage, and then went to the SP11, and the SP11 was a hardcore hybrid, just using a couple of tubes, and it really just set a new standard for real hybrid products with a lot of FETs. Actually, Bill was using J-FETs. And Bill was funny, by the way, because he always said, I don't design, I'm not purely, I'll just use the best parts wherever they may be. So whether that's a tube or it's a transistor, that's fine. There was a time when he thought that tubes were going to go away, that manufacturing would cease, and he came out with some solid-state products that were actually very, very good. You listen to them today, and they're very good. And people, especially like Harry Pearson, some of the really hardcore magazines, just took an affront to it. It was like, no, you can't do that. But it's whatever. The point is reproduction of music. I mean, we're trying to play music back in our homes, and first of all, not everyone can tolerate the heat. Particularly tube amps can put off a lot of heat. One reviewer said the 750 was like sitting around the campfire, and he was right, because those things there were 32 output tubes. So the key is just using the best parts possible for a particular circuit, and that's the thing. With I'll go to the 330, for example. We've taken some things. It's the first input to output tube gain amplifier we've done in years, and it's putting out very, very high power, but it's not putting out a ton of heat. There are 6 KT172s, and we're using tube regulation and things like that. So it's simply a matter of mixing and matching. We don't want to be too dogmatic and say it has to be all tube, it has to be all solid state, it has to be zero feedback, whatever. It depends on the circuit, what you're designing, and what your intentions are, and what your costs are going to be on this, what your price point. And engineers love being free to do whatever they want, and sometimes the hardest thing is designing less expensive products that are going to sound like they're part of the family.
Sure. You have to be much more selective in terms of the compromises you have to make. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I just want to talk now about the 330M, which I've reviewed and I've had the pleasure of having in-house for a number of weeks. The review will publish in the next few weeks in early 2025. So from it was under my impression that there was a fairly lengthy gestation period for the 330M.
Yes.
I remember hearing about this new monoblock a number of years ago, I think in Munich. What were the reasons behind that? Was it a product that originated with the previous company owners that had to be reevaluated, or was it a design that you started off from scratch with the new owner at Okura Acoustics?
Well, when Trent purchased the company in 2020, we had the 160M mono, we had the 160S. And so then we came out with the 80S, which had been in the works, the smallest reference amplifier. So we had a head start with this, and it was really good because the old ownership, when Jeff Poggi was our CEO, had the right engineers in place, and said, we were like, let's do something new. We just don't want to reinvent the wheel or just do some things, just variations on a theme. And the 160M was really a breakthrough for us, where we were using 4-layer circuit boards, using some new technology, some new transformers. It was the first time we had done ultralinear end triode switching, things like that. It was and it was really quite a breakthrough. Plus, of course, aesthetically, because that was the influence of of pushing us to modernize, which we were always a very purposeful looking product, and we realized, being under the same umbrella with Macintosh, frankly, is that everyone likes meters, and people like big meters. But when you're doing tubes, if you can have big meters and also be able to see the tubes at the same time, that was everything we could hope for. And so we and Livio Cucuzza of Sonus Faber, who's a dear friend and owns a lot of audio research, he and Warren and we got together and came up with the idea of the clear meter. And Livio was the one who kind of put it together. This is how it should work. And it was a great idea. So that was wonderful. The thing about the 160M is that it's a wonderful amplifier, but today's market is funny. People, if they buy, let's say, if they're buying a pair of Wilson Sashas, it's one thing. But if they're buying a pair of Alex's, they're like, well, I just need a bigger amplifier. This amplifier just isn't, I hate to say it, expensive enough, or they want something that is simply that much more powerful. And we take a big pair of Machicos, and it depends on how much power you need. But you could run out of power with a 160, running a pair of the old S3s or S5s, for example. So we wanted to build a bigger amplifier to satisfy those people. So the first idea was the reference 320, doubling the power, and that was first shown actually just as a shell in Munich in 2022. And it was envisioned as just simply being a much larger amplifier. And that was fine, except that we needed a little more engineering and to really get us through, to push things along. And so when the change came, when Trent transitioned to Val's ownership, and Val was able to bring in more engineering, and also the desire at the kind of being unafraid of really pushing the envelope as far as performance and price-wise, without constraints. We just got some great engineering, and we're really able to develop this into, we think, the next breakthrough product. The 330M, look, all of our products sound like they do come from the same family, and they don't sound different from each other. As they get bigger, they get better. But the 330M gets better in an explosive way, and as far as resolution and dynamics. And the other thing is just being able to deliver high power at low frequencies. And the 330M controls speakers and drives them like a big solid-state amplifier, but with tubes. And that's the thing. You get the glory of tubes. You get the air and the life, and the texture and the rich tonality and things like that out of a big tube amplifier. I had a debate with the editor of a magazine, because he was kind of taken like with one of our reference amplifiers, not a 330, and he's like, truth and beauty, and that's the whole thing. You want truth is resolution, dynamics. It's being able to hear that space, but the beauty is when you hear live music, it has just such wonderful texture. And
tonality, I suppose, as well.
Rich, right,
tonal.
exactly, the tonality. And that, to us, tonality is really hard to do, really rich tonality, full tonality with solid-state devices. You have to really work hard, but you get it much more easily with tubes, especially if you know what you're doing.
Sure. Okay, so in light of the 330M's emergence,
Yes.
so aside from output, what are the distinctions between the 330M and the reference 750 SEL that is also part of the current portfolio?
It is, and we're phasing it out. We really, because the 330M simply outperforms the 750 SEL in every way. I mean, it's the 750 SEL on the bench. When we ship them, we'll put out about 800 watts per channel. That is a lot of power. It's a lot of tubes. It takes a pool of about 300 tubes to get a full set of match tubes for a pair of 750s. And that is just, it's onerous. And we stock a lot of tubes, and we can do that. But, for example, if we sold a pair of 750s, and then we have 2 or 3 orders for more sets, and that's hard. You need 500-700, actually probably close to 1,000 tubes to select from. So that's difficult. It's hard to match. We took some things from really from the 610 and put them in the and the 750 also, and put them in the 330. I mean, we have a tube at the input. In the 330, for example, we are using ECC 83 or 12AX7, where we're using, I believe, a 6H30 in the 750, or the 610. And we're using tube regulation, which in the 330 that we hadn't done since older series. But what we also put in, we put in a new choke. We put in totally new circuit boards, and we're doing 4-layer boards for the analog stage again. Again, new transformers. We're borrowing bits and pieces from some of the older series, but we're recombining them differently with different circuits and brand new parts. I mean, there are some fabulous new parts that, for example, some bipolars now that we're using in regulation that just we couldn't get before. And
I actually wanted to touch on that because valve amplification can span the whole gamut. It can be a fairly simple design, and right up to obviously a complex design, as you're talking about. So my question, which goes on from what you were saying, is what are the key technologies in the 330M? What makes a 330M a $90,000 amplifier? What is built in there that you some of the technologies anyway that you just touched on?
It's using a new tube called the KT170, and this is the first time we've used this. When we were designing the 320, or actually the 330, we moved beyond that. We had received KT170s probably back in 2020, I think, when they first came out. So it's a new tube. And when people say, oh, tubes are going away, no, they're not. They're coming up with new models. I mean, the KT120,
yes,
the KT150, the KT170 are all new tubes. And the 170 and 150 are fairly close. The thing is, you have to design from the ground up almost with these tubes. So we built 2 prototypes. We built a 330 with KT150s and built one with 170s. But we saw more potential in the 170, but you have to really design around the tube. And it's like any amplifier, whether it's solid state or tubes, you have to design around the output stage. You know, what are you doing for the inputs? What are you doing for regulation? And so it's a unique design, unlike anything else we've done before. And that's the key. So they're expensive. Doing 4-layer boards are expensive. Transformers have gotten silly expensive. You know, particularly because we design a lot of our own parts, which people don't realize. We design our own transformers. We design our own capacitors. And we design our own cable, our own internal wiring. When we're playing with a new capacitor, you can fine-tune the sound of a capacitor the way you can a dish. I mean, the way you season a dish. Anyone can follow a recipe and cook something. A chef will season the taste. You want a little bit more of this, you want more of that, and the key is keeping everything in balance. Sometimes you know it's just you know, something maybe too astringent. Maybe it needs a little more oregano or some other herb, whatever. You know, you have to be careful how much salt you add to things. It's just, and that's exactly what it's like designing electronics. You can't go by rote. And you know, some people think that it's tube product. They're still working off the same old 50, 60, 70-year-old, you know, circuit topologies. No, these are totally different. For example, using a 4-layer circuit board, you can design a totally separate ground plane. And when you do have a separate ground plane, it allows you to just lay out your circuits very differently. And you can get things really, really quiet. You can take, I don't know if you have a reference 6. If you have a reference 6 SE and you have the 330s, I invite you to put it in mute, go to an unused input, turn the volume all the way up to 103, full gain, and take it out of mute. There's no noise.
Okay.
And even with something like, let's say, with a horn amplifier or a horn speaker rather, you know, noise is low because, and the whole point of this is that, you know, the analogy I make is like trying to see the stars. When you listen to music, you want a black background. You don't want to, you know, look at them. You can't see the Milky Way from a city. You have to go out in the country. You need that for everything to pop out. And it's the same thing with what we're doing. So it takes a lot of time. It just takes, you know, if you look inside, we're using different wires in different spots, you know, and we work with a couple of different wire manufacturers domestically in the U.S. who make our internal wires for us. Again and again, we're assembling these things from the ground up by hand. We're installing every component by hand, every resistor, every capacitor. And actually, if you flip the amplifier over, which you should do before you pack it up, is look at the auto bias boards in the bottom of a 330. You know, other tube manufacturers use auto bias boards, but I guarantee you, are the only one who hand solder every component on the auto bias board. And you'll see surface mount connectors in there. And it was interesting because we learned this in the 160, where the 160M was essentially put to bed. We all listened, signed off on it, thought it was wonderful. The engineer said, come back, I want everyone coming back tomorrow when I play the same thing for you. It should be a little better. We all went back the next day, and the first day we were listening to Rachmaninoff, and you could hear the air coming off the orchestra. And it was a Minnesota Orchestra recording, so we know the hall, we know the orchestra pretty well. And the second day, we didn't hear the air coming off. The resolution was there, everything was there, but there was this magic that was missing. And the difference was that the auto bias board was actually had with the surface mount connectors, components were actually wave soldered on. And we could hear the difference in the soldering. People say, come on, you can't hear these. These are repeatable. These are things that we can all hear together. And that's one of the things. It's just doing that. The 330M is also the first of our reference amplifiers that individually biases every tube in the amplifier, so every output tube. So this is really, really important, and everything just keeps getting more sophisticated. But the other thing is that the products we're producing now are so foolproof. We just want people to go home, turn their system on, and listen to music, and not worry about it. With the auto bias boards, you don't worry about the bias changing, whether your line voltage is dropping or it's going up or the tubes are aging, things like that. You have to have consistency, and we're really, really happy with this. And with the KT170s, like the 150s, they're going to last about 3,000 hours. So that's a lot of time.
Sure. And the hour counter is pure genius, actually. So it's a great inclusion. Okay, Dave, thank you very much. We're having some internet issues, I think, so maybe we'll finish here now. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to you reading the review. Hopefully, when it comes out on the 15th of January.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
All right. Take care. Be well.
You too. Bye-bye.